It's okay. No, maybe not.
Just don't. If you're going ahead anyway, that's all right. But don't think you have to go ahead just because I'm here.
No. I was like, regardless, it's being recorded, so I'll go. Like,
yeah, okay.
We'll do it because some people wanted to watch. But if not, otherwise I might start until you shut up. But okay, cool. So in terms of, I figured like we'll start off in terms of like going over how to actually choose different sort of universities to go to, because a lot of people have issues thinking like, oh, where like which one should I go to? Should I go to like this one because it's better known, or I don't know. So things like that. And so in terms of looking at it, there tends to be sort of three different things to take into account, or three main things to take into account. Thank you, John, much appreciated. So there are three main things to take into account. So first of all, there's like course structure. So it falls into three sort of categories in terms of it's either problem-based learning, case-based learning, or mainly like lecture-based. And so what that means is you kind of need to decide which one is, people should I wait then, if people are only just getting a notification?
No, don't wait, just keep going.
Okay. So it depends on you whether you choose somewhere that's like mainly problem-based, case-based, or lecture-based learning. So in terms of how they all work, lecture-based is exactly how it sounds. It's just you sitting there listening to a lecturer, and the good thing about that is they lay out the objectives and they teach you exactly what you need to know to pass that exam and have like a good basis and everything. For problem-based, it's much more, they'll give you a problem, like it says in the title, something like, this person comes in with chest pain, and then your group need to go away and think about all the relevant things that you need to find out about this person. So you need to look up like anatomy of the heart, pathologies of the heart, things like that. So it's very much guided by, funnily enough, we were talking about podcasts earlier, so don't knock it just yet. With problem-based, it's much more you guide your own learning, which sounds great in like thinking about it at first, but actually it involves you being very strict with actually keeping on top of the work that you need to do. And it also means that as a subject, medicine's quite annoying in that it can be very difficult to know when to stop, like what level of detail, because it's pretty much like an infinite amount of detail into everything. Like you can dive down into sort of like the biochemistry if you wanted to, even though it won't be that relevant to your clinical practice. But that's where a lot of people have a bit of an issue with problem-based learning, in that you don't know when to stop. And so you could spend absolutely hours learning about something. And what that means is it's private. What's private? Oh, the YouTube channel. Okay. So that's been thought about. So it means that you are going to end up, or not that you're going to end up, but you could end up spending hours and hours looking into something because it's interesting or whatever, which is absolutely fine, but it won't actually be that relevant to your final exam. But you won't really know that until you get to this next session and they say, oh, okay, that's not actually something that we need to go into a huge amount of detail on. So that's a bit of a con with the PBL, but it does mean that you get to improve like your communication, your team working skills, because you're always working in a group. And in terms of that, it's quite good. But again, the main thing is it just relies on you like being really on it with the work, which everyone always thinks they will be. And then you get into first year uni and you end up like going out or socializing a lot, and it's very easy to fall behind on it. So it's definitely something to consider. Like, be realistic with yourself. Is it something that you can keep on top of? And if it's not, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, there's a lot of people that just can't work like that. But it will just help you in deciding that a particular uni maybe isn't for you, because that's how their course is structured. So that's problem-based learning. And then you've got case-based learning, which is somewhere in between the two. So you'll be given like cases to look over, but there'll be a lot more guidance. So the person, like the moderator, they're called, the person that sits with your group, will give you points to talk about and points to explore. And you'll have like a lecture at the beginning introducing you to the topic, and a lecture at the end telling you what you should have, like the main takeaways from that topic. So it's kind of problem-based learning, but with a bit of a safety net, in that you know that you will definitely get given the learning points. And so again, that's quite that could be quite useful. But if you want your kind of first few years of medicine, like your uni experience, to just be sort of sitting in a lecture theatre, learning what you need to learn, going, socialising, dotting around, whatever, then go for like a lecture-based course. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like many people, including myself, found that absolutely fine. Another thing to consider actually is if your sessions are mainly lecture-based, then they may well be recorded. So what that means is that if you, for whatever reason, you're ill or you can't make a particular lecture for some reason, i.e. possibly you're hungover, or whatever it happens to be, it means that you'll have that lecture recorded to come back to. But it also means that if you're someone that feels like you can't really work in a lecture environment, which I find that all the time, like I'm not huge on going to lectures and just sitting there because I fall asleep. So what I would do is in my first few years, I'd literally just like wake up an hour after the lecture because I knew the lecture would be recorded by then. Sit in my room, go to the library, go to the Starbucks, whatever. Stick my headphones in, and then I'd just kind of be doing the day an hour behind, but at my own speed, so I can like speed the lecture up to like 2 times speed. The thought behind that is to get through it quicker, but all that ends up happening is you end up rewinding a bit more, so you don't actually get through it any quicker, but you feel a bit more productive. So yes, I will go over that. So I'll go over all of that in terms of like how to prepare for the application and stuff as well in a minute. So yeah, that's all the stuff in terms of different course structures. Does anyone have any questions about that so far?
Does your uni like mind that you're doing that?
No. So there are some. At the end of the day, the uni. Well, okay, it kind of depends on what uni you go to, but the uni mostly care about the fact that can you pass the exam at the end. If you pass the exam and then they look at the attendance and your attendance hasn't been great, then they'll be like, okay, whatever, you passed the exam, it's fine. If you then fail, but it turns out you haven't been to a whole load of registered stuff, then they'll come back at you and go, why weren't you there? But again, it depends on what's registered. So we used to have seminars and things that were registered, and I'd go to those. But in terms of just like lectures, if they weren't like registered, then no one will know either way. And if you can get away with, well, not get away because that sounds like you're doing something wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you can learn by not being there, then go for it. There's like nothing wrong with that. It's a lot more of a time for you to discover how you learn and do what's best for you, rather than like them dictating this is how you should do everything.
So what uni do you go to?
Nottingham.
So you find it that fine? You find that all right? Just going to lectures and or listening to lectures and things rather than problem-based learning.
Yeah, definitely. So some of our courses were problem-based learning, and the general opinion was no one really liked it because we were used to our lectures. So the fact that you had to go in and actually like concentrate and contribute was a bit of a new thing. But yeah, so you can like even in your lecture-based things, you'll probably get a little bit of problem-based learning, but the majority of it will be lecture-based, and we all found that absolutely fine. Some people like it more, some people like it less. But again, at the end of the day, like if it's something to consider, but it's not like don't go too overboard on it because at the end of it, it's only going to be your first 2 or 3 years of uni will be like that. After that, you get shoved onto clinical placement, and it's a completely sort of different world. So even if you end up in doing lectures and you find out that, oh, I actually really prefer that PBL module, then okay, fine. It's not like ideal, but you can also get through it knowing that your entire uni experience won't be like that. And once you get into the medicine side, like the clinical placement side of things, you end up doing a lot more like problem-based learning type stuff anyway, and working in groups. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about, but again, don't be under the impression that if you pick the wrong one, you'll be absolutely miserable for 3 years. Like whatever it is, you will be able to make it work. It's just something that like you can go into knowing sort of what you're putting yourself out there for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, so course structure is something to think about when choosing. Another thing is whether it's like a city or a campus university, and that's more just about the university experience. So like campus uni, you'll have like nice green fields, and you'll be in your own little university bubble. and you'll probably have a fairly easy way to go to and from town. But again, just think about like the experience that you want. So, do you want it to be in terms of like you step out of your door and you're suddenly in a city, or do you want to step out your door and you've got loads of halls of residences really close, stuff like that. Also think about whether you like the city. Like obviously, if you go somewhere and you think I really hate that place, then don't put yourself out there to do 5 years of it. Is this a general point? So try to stick to cities that you like, but also don't exclusively go for the ones that you like if the universities are really difficult to get into. If that makes sense. Like if you know you won't meet the entry requirements for something, then don't go to it. Don't apply for it just because you like the city. So it's all about like striking that balance. And then the third thing is clinical experience. So like how early do they start giving you clinical experience? So some universities will like keep you out of the hospital by all means until you get to clinical placement. And some people prefer that. And then other universities will like give you a little bit every so often. So like at Nottingham, we used to do a morning in either a hospital or GP practice every couple of weeks. And so it's kind of like, okay, on the one hand, it was annoying because you have to get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning to get trekked across East Midlands to some random rural GP somewhere. But it's also quite good in that it sort of keeps reminding you what you're doing, because it's quite easy when you start off doing things like biochemistry and like loads of really sciencey stuff to kind of lose the fact that you're actually doing the course. So that's quite nice in just sort of reminding you that that's what you're there for and giving you an idea about like what sort of things you'll be learning in the future, how you can apply what you're learning now to things like clinical things. So that sort of stuff's always quite nice. And then, should I write things down? Should I make a little live? Should I make a screen grab? So, right. So we've said in terms of like choosing, we've got PBL, CBL lectures, and then have a think about the uni / city or campus, and then clinical experience. Yeah, so then when it comes to actual applications, it's super important to bloody hell, good job, Johnny. I love Greenfield's call experience. Yeah, so in terms of the actual application side of things, so you will do it through, at first it all goes through UCAS. So what you do with UCAS is you put in all of your grades, so like your GCSEs, your predicted grades, any other like relevant stuff, if you like. And what happens with that is it just means that all of the universities have they have access to the same information about you, and then they'll look at that and decide whether, on top of like your personal statement, your UCAS scores, which I'll come on to, whether they would like to give you an interview. So in terms of like doing stuff to fluff up your UCAS application, it's always a good idea. So like obviously make sure your grades are as good as possible. Have like a decent personal statement, make sure your work experience is good, things like that. So that brings us on to talking about exams, so like UCAT or BMAT, and also talking about extracurriculars. So in terms of the exams, it's usually a good idea to make a decision about what universities you want to apply to before you sign up to the exams. Like if you can't and you just want to do both exams and then decide afterwards, fair, that's fine. But also you don't, like the reason I say try and decide beforehand is just because you don't want to end up having done a UCAT and a BMAT and then going, oh, actually I'm just going to apply to all UCAT universities, because you just kind of wasted a bit of time with the BMAT. If you really don't know where to apply and you want to do both, then go for it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But like if you know in your head that the main universities you want to go to are UCAT ones, then just do the UCAT. Like there's no point doing the BMAT just for the lols. So yeah, with UCAT, it's a difficult exam in terms of not like the content's difficult, but I think the main difficulty is A, time pressure, and B, just like sitting yourself down to do the practice, because it is a dull test. And so actually sitting down to make sure you're doing like the revision for it can be a bit of a nightmare sometimes, especially if you're doing it over the summer holidays when you'd like much rather be out with your friends. So I'd say like it's like about trying to find a balance between when you start preparing and when your exam is. So you don't want to start like way too like right before your exam, like a few days before, where you don't really have time to learn anything. But also you don't want to start like months and months and months in advance, where by the time it gets that last sort of 2-3 weeks where you really want to put some work in, you're burned out and you don't want to look at another abstract reasoning question ever again. So most people, I think, or at least from like what I've heard from talking to other people in my experience, most people start somewhere around like 2 weeks to a month before. And then like in the last couple of weeks, they will ramp it up. Obviously, if they started at 2 weeks, they just sort of go ham the entire time. But they just kind of do it on a bit of a gradient. And I'd say that's probably a good idea, just to, again, avoid burnout. And in terms of like doing the preparation, definitely just do loads and loads of questions. Like there are techniques to do each section, and don't think just because these people are saying like this is how you do the section, that's the only way to do that section, or like you have to apply that technique without fail, because some questions will need it, some won't. But also when you're under time pressure, like the last thing you want to do is be sitting there like counting the sides of a star, trying to figure out if like it's a multiple of 3 times 2 divided by 5 or something like that, something like mental. Some of these questions in practice books are like that. It's just like crazy. So yeah, do that. Online question banks are really good, because the more practice you can get actually doing it online, in terms of like doing it in the same kind of context as you would be doing the actual thing, so on a computer, on a keyboard with like a number pad, the better it will be for you. Because like, so some people when they're practicing will use like scientific calculators, which is absolutely fine. Like we're all good at using them and you can do stuff on them really quickly. But when you get into the actual exam, you find that your calculator is this like circa 1998 software calculator that's absolutely terrible and does pretty much like nothing for you in terms of helping you speed things up. So if you can practice using one of those with a keypad on your keyboard, then automatically you'll have, just because you'll have it in your head, like you'll be a bit, it's almost like touch typing, like you'll just be a bit quicker on it. You won't need to worry about that slowing you down in the actual thing. And then yeah, online question banks are really good. So like you can have their own practice tests you can do. Medic Portal have a really good question bank, like especially sort of the 2 weeks to a month before. I'd say it's worth like just putting in the money and subscribing to theirs and just hammering your way through all of them. I think there are some like Kaplan, Medify, stuff like that. I never used them, but I know other people have. I use Medic Portal and they worked really well for me. So that is you can. Oh, and the other thing is in the test. I think the biggest thing. This is more of like a matter of opinion, having done it and stuff. But one of the biggest things is actually time management over anything else. Like they're testing how well can you manage your time under pressure. And so what that means is if you see a question and you know that in the like in air quotes like allotted time you're supposed to take over that question for that section, if you can't do it, just flag it and move on. And then what that means is that you'll like hammer your way through all of the easy questions first, and you'll get those marks. And then all of the difficult questions that you need to spend time on, you can come back to, and if you need to, guess them. But it's better than spending ages on like an easy, really difficult question, like 3 or 4 questions in, and then missing out on all of the easy ones after that. So definitely, like, don't be afraid of just flagging something and then coming back to it at the end. That will, if anything, that will help you. Just don't like flag everything. So be realistic about what you can answer in the time you're supposed to answer a question in for that section. So that is UCAT. BMAT, I can't, and there's no one in the chat that's actually done it, I don't think. So I didn't do it, so I can't particularly help you there, but I know Fiona and Young did. So if you have any questions, feel free to DM them. Any questions about either of those so far? No? Okay, cool. So then there is extracurriculars. So people always, and work experience. Okay, so I'll put that down as well. So people always ask about extracurriculars. And it's always along the lines of, are these extracurriculars okay? Like, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this? Should I do that? And there's no like set list of extracurricular things you need to have done aside from work experience. And that one they say you need to have done. And then low-key care home experience is just something they kind of expect. But in terms of other extracurriculars, what you want to do is so in this whole application process, what they're looking for isn't like, are you already a medical student? Like, do you already have the knowledge and stuff? They're looking for the skills that you have. So the 4 sort of main skills that they'll be looking for are leadership, teamwork, empathy, and communication. So a lot of the stuff that they do, whether it's in the application process or like in terms of reviewing your application or in interviews, they will be looking for those qualities in you. And so ideally what you want to do is you want to find something in each of your extracurriculars that can show that you've been developing this skill or you've got this skill. And that's the best type of extracurricular where you've been showing that you've been sort of committed to it for a while and it's something where you're using one of these things. And in terms of putting that down on a personal statement, that's absolutely brilliant. Like, that's what you want. So whenever like you feel like asking, is this extracurricular good or not, just think, can this extracurricular give me like experience in one of these areas? And if it can, then it's a good extracurricular, and like stick with it. So speaking of sticking with it, actually commitment's another thing they like to see. So if you started doing D of E in like year 9 or 10, and yeah, to be fair, chess is the one thing that doesn't apply to any of those. Damn, sorry. Yeah, so in terms of sticking with it, they like to see, because with medicine, like, you're making a fairly big commitment in terms of at least 5 years of your life and then a whole career in it afterwards if you stick on with it. So they want to see that you can like commit to something and actually stick with it for a while. Like, if on your application you're saying I did this for a year and then this for a year and then this for 6 months and that for 3 months, then okay, great, you've got a lot of skills, but none of them actually showed a huge amount of commitment because you're just like jumping between them. So ideally what you want is something where you've been doing it for a good few years and you've stuck with it, even if it's not a huge amount, like even if it's once every week or once every couple of weeks, you've still been doing it for a while and you've shown that commitment. So the easiest way to do this is like for DOV, you always have a volunteering or like a community bit that you can start volunteering at like a charity shop for. DOV is Duke of Edinburgh, and it's like a little scheme. Yeah, DOE. So yeah, it's a scheme in the UK, and as part of that, you can do like a community bit. And for that, if you just like start volunteering at a charity shop and you just carry on until your application, that will mean that even if you've done it, like I said, like once every week, once every couple of weeks for an hour or two, over what you'll be able to say on your application is, I've done this for 3 years. And what that will say to the admissions people is, I can commit to something, which is what you want. Yeah, so any questions about extracurriculars? Okay. Do societies fit into extras? Yeah. And some societies will be really good. So where this then goes further in terms of this is on to interview, but where extracurriculars then go further is what you want to be able to do is for each of these extracurriculars say, these are the skills that they like, these are the skills that are required for this extracurricular. And then you want to have you want to have an example in your head of when you've had to use one of these skills, when it didn't work, and what you did to improve it, like how you reflected on it and how you thought about improving it the next time. And so any society where you're using these skills, whether you're like in cadets and so you're using like leadership, teamwork, and communication, so that's actually quite a good one. And or like just something that's like a lecture-based society where you're giving lectures on a particular topic, that's communication, and maybe teamwork if you're working with other people. Those are the kind of things you want. So societies that have helped. I'm using Microsoft Whiteboard for writing. Societies that helped are things. So I've said I talked about cadets, which is what I did, and I had loads of examples because of it of like leadership, teamwork, communication. That's good. If you got involved in like debating society, that would be really good for communication, because that means that you're taking an argument, you're looking at both sides of it, and then you're conveying your thoughts in a structured, logical way, which is great. Everyone likes that. If it's some sort of like chemistry society or biology society, if you're like on the committee, which involves leadership and teamwork with the rest of the committee, that'd be great. It could also involve communication if you're like talking to teachers, talking to like organizing things with other societies. If it's a society where you have to give like lectures on a subject, that'll be communication. So most societies will have something, okay, aside from chess, will have something that you can get from this. But even in like a chess society, if you're the person leading it, then there you go, there are your leadership skills and your communication skills in terms of like setting stuff up, organizing things. So it's all, there will be something in every society you can find that fits one of these skills. It's more about lateral thinking, to figure out what it is sometimes. So it's not always going to be like the most obvious thing, but you will find something. Any other questions about extracurriculars? No? Okay. Cool. So then work experience. This is another one that always like people have a lot of questions about, in that like, oh, is this enough work experience? Should I do more? Like, should I go to a different country and do work experience? At the end of the day, what they're looking for is they're looking at, what did you learn? So you could go to a GP for like 2 days and learn more than someone that went to like Argentina for 2 weeks. All it involves you doing is just watching and learning about the career, like talking to people about what it's like as a career, but also at the back of your head, you should also be looking for examples of each of these. And again, I'll come back on, that's more of an interview point, because in interviews, what they'll say is, what did you learn on your work experience? And what that question is saying, on sort of beneath the question, is it saying, tell me about, well, first show me that you were paying attention on your work experience and what you learned. But also the kind of follow-up behind that is, do whatever skills you're talking about that you saw on your work experience that are therefore important to medicine, do you have them? And so with that question, it's always a good idea to answer it in the form of, on my work experience, I saw whatever, like I saw a GP talking to a patient about a condition. And that emphasized the importance of communication. I've been improving my communication skills by being part of the debating committee, although on reflection, one thing that one area where my communication might be lacking is talking in front. And say what I've been doing is I've been signing up for debates there in front of the entire year group society to help overcome. And that would be a really good answer, because what you've done is you've said that you've identified something that's important for medicine, and therefore you've learned something from your work experience, that you're doing something to develop, that you've got that skill, and you're doing something to develop it, but also you're aware that you're not perfect at that skill, and you can reflect on it and say that, oh, maybe this could like use improvement. And you don't just say like that you've identified it, you then say what you've done to start improving it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong in interviews with saying something, like saying you're not good at something. Like, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, you don't go like saying you're not good at anything, but saying something like, oh, I've been working on my communication, but this is an area where I'm weaker, is absolutely fine. That's what they want you to do. They want you to be realistic about what you're good at and what you're not. But then the follow-up to that should always be, but to improve this, I have been doing whatever, which shows them that you're not going to just sit on the fact that you're not good at something. You will then continuously try and so yeah, with work experience, what did you learn? So try and learn about the career as a whole, what like the work-life balance is like, what the workload's like, what specialties are like, if you're in a specialty area like cardiology or whatever. And then look out for examples that you can use of these, because they'll be really good when it comes to interviews. And then keep a diary as well, because once it comes, by the time it actually comes around to writing a personal statement in your interview, you probably won't remember like half of the important. So keep a little diary. And what that means is every time you see something and you're like, oh, that's a leadership point, then just write that down as like a leadership point, or every time you see something and think, oh, that's good. That's a good example of communication. Write it down like communication. Doctor did this. And yeah, just keep notes on it that you can refer back to when you're doing a personal statement. Okay, any questions about that? If not, I will go to personal statement. Cool. So then with personal statement, this is, depending on where you apply, it will have, well, it's important everywhere, but some places will like give it a rank or will mark it out of a certain amount. Some places will just look at it, like get the vague vibe and then move on. Where you're applying, try and get as much information as you can about how they'll use it. So if it's somewhere that will mark it, try and find out how they mark it, how much they mark it out. And if they're telling you that, they'll probably tell you how they mark everything else, like your GCSE grades, your UCAT score, all of that. So you can give it a pretty good stab at figuring out what your like application score will be before you even apply, and that can help guide you whether that's a good university to apply to or not. But again, in it, all you're trying to show them is that you have, is like why you want to do it. Don't just say you want to help people. Like obviously it's true, which is why you're doing it. But don't just leave it at that. Like have something else as well. It's a really good idea to have motivation on both sides of like you want to help and whatever, but also on the side of why does it interest you academically? Because it's like the course is very much split between the two, in that not everything is going to be super academic, but also you need to kind of find it interesting in an academic way to some extent to actually be able to do it and like find it interesting. So have a reason for both. As in interest in the academics. So even if it's just something like saying, you know, so some people have like a personal experience that made them want to do it. That's fine. Write that down. But then say something in terms of just like, you know, you like the subject, you find this particular thing really interesting. I heart bio, exactly. Johnny has the right idea. So just something along those lines of like you find it really interesting learning about how the body works, or learning about how like integrating how the body and the mind work and affect each other, stuff like that. So something that shows some form of an academic, like you're interested in the subject, as well as you're interested in helping people. And then what it is it's basically, it's a really difficult one because you're trying to brag and say I'm like, but without explicitly sounding like, which is like a fine line to tread. But a good way to go about it is just make sure that you back up everything you say with evidence. So again, in your personal statement, just like all other aspects of your application, they will be looking for the fact that you have skills like leadership, teamwork, empathy, communication, all the important ones for medicine. What you want to do in your personal statement is get those across. So you can do it in a similar structure to how you'd answer that interview question, in the way of, you know, when I was on my work experience, so like I don't know, I did work experience in a in a dermatology department, and while I was there, I learned the importance of communication. And then go through the whole, I've been doing this extracurricular to improve my communication, and as part of that, I've identified some areas of weakness that I'm trying to improve, something like that. Something that when you say, when you show them that you've learned something from your work experience about like what skills are important, where you can then say, oh, and I have this skill. And if you're like really good, what you can do, especially if you've got panel interviews coming up, is you can just drop this little breadcrumb of, I saw that teamwork was really important, and I've been improving my team working skills during my time in the CCF, or sorry, in like cadets. And what that does is that sets them up for a really, like, they'll see that and go, oh, okay, we want to know more about that. And so you can pretty much guarantee that one of your questions is going to be, tell us about an example of when teamwork was important. And you could, in like when you're in the cadets, something like that. And so what you're doing is you're dropping these little like hints for them to pick up, that's just like too good for them not to ask you about. and so you can kind of have an idea of what questions they're going to ask you when you get to interview. Granted, that doesn't work as much now because a lot of interviews are MMI, so they don't tend to have a copy of your personal statement anyway. But if for whatever reason you are, well, not for whatever reason, but if you are applying a panel interview uni, then that's definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, personal statement, just like write drafts, get loads of people to read over it, and yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. Okay, any questions about that? No? Cool. So at that point then, what will have happened is you will have chosen which universities you want to, well, you will have filled in your UCAS form with all of your grades, put your personal statement in. Oh, that's another thing. Writing your personal statement, because it has to be a certain number of characters and a certain number of words. Said it can be this number of lines or this number of words. They were wrong. It has to be that number of lines and that number of words, or below that number of lines and number of words. So when you're doing it, make sure just every so often you put it into the UCAS website. Obviously, don't submit it, but just put it in and see if you're over the word count. Because I did mine in Word happily, like thinking it's fine, and then the night before, like the day we were supposed to submit it, like half an hour or an hour before the deadline, I put it in and I was like, fine, there's absolutely nothing I need to change now. I'm happy with it. And then I was like 2 lines over. And so I spent the next hour cut out random bits. So don't do it with me. Just double check in there when as you're going along. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's personal statement. So like I said, by that time you will have filled out your UCAS form. You will have done personal statement. That will get sent off. You'll put into UCAS which universities you want to apply to, and then you can't. And then at the point where you go into interview, a lot of places now have you at like equal rank, so it doesn't matter about the rest of your application anymore. You could have just scraped through into the interview group, or you could have been like the top of their list. At this point, it doesn't matter anymore. Like they'll probably just be looking at your interview performance. So you can make up for an if a UCAS application with a really good interview, but vice versa. You can have an amazing UCAS application but completely tank the interview, and that's it. So that's something to keep in mind. So then next step is interviews. They come in 2 forms if we're not talking about Oxbridge. So they will either be MMI or they'll be. So MMI stands for multiple mini interviews, and what that is you basically have like a room, and they'll have divided up the room into different stations with like curtains and whatever, and you just start at one, and then every 10 minutes or so you'll go in, you'll do the station. Usually it's about like 10 minutes. A little bell will go and that'll tell you the station's over, and what that means is you then leave, you go to wait outside the next one, and either you'll get a bit of time to read over the scenario and they'll have like a little sheet of paper telling you what the scenario is, or you just go straight in, and like inside the station is the first time you're seeing the scenario. It varies from school to school, but it's basically this idea that you just sort of get bounced around the room like that until you get to the end, and that's your interview over. So in terms of like good things about this, it means that if you mess up one stage, it doesn't mean your entire interview's like been completely ruined. So even if you mess up a couple, that's absolutely fine because they're all marked independently of each other. So the examiner in each station will never talk to an examiner from another station. And so you know that they are marking your performance on that station and that station only. Bad thing is, if you build a really in a station, that counts for absolutely nothing in the next station. So even if you and the person in like station 1 become really good friends in 10 minutes somehow, by the time it means absolutely nothing and you just start from scratch again. So it's a much more objective way of assessing interview performance. But again, you can't rely on like rapport to carry you. But then it also works vice versa, which means that if you do like have a really bad rapport with an interviewer, that won't mean your entire interview's ruined. So yeah, these are very similar to OSCEs as well, which are like the practical exams you do once you're in university. And you get quite a few different types of station in here. So there's a there's already a video on the YouTube channel about this, but I'll run over it again quickly. So there is like ethics stations where they'll give you an ethical scenario and say, talk me through it. There will be like some data interpretation questions where they'll give you some data and say, describe it, interpret it, explain it to me, etc. There'll be role plays, notoriously fitted, where they so there'll be like role plays when you'll either have to like break bad news to someone or explain a condition to someone, things like that. One that tends to come up quite a lot is tell me about an article you've read, or tell me about some medical news you've read recently. So like have an article in your head that you can go in and talk about. So yeah, there's a whole range of them, and so preparing for them is very. They'll probably ask you about like your work experience at one of the stations, or like one we talked about it. So yeah, preparing for them is difficult and prepare for a lot, a bit easier in terms of the fact that the stations that come up tend to be quite repetitive in their styles. So there'll be a role play, there'll be an ethics kind of thing. They'll probably ask you about work experience. There might be a prioritization question station, and because of that, you can have practiced each of those before, and so that kind of helps out. But yeah, that's what an MMI is. And then the panel is just like a standard interview where you go in and there's like 5 people in front of you and they just ask you questions. In panel, they're much more likely to ask you questions like, why do you want to do medicine? And to ask you questions about your personal statement. Whereas in MMI, because you're going through like 10 people in an hour or whatever, it's not really feasible for them to have the examiners to read every single person's personal statement and ask them questions on it. So they tend not to have personal statement based questions. And they tend, just because they know it's a question that everyone will have prepared for, they tend not to really ask, why do you want to do medicine? Or if they do, it probably won't be weighted as highly as the other stations. That's the other thing as well. Another good thing about MMIs is if you've, because they don't talk to each other, the interviewers, if you have a answer that can be applied to multiple different stations by just tweaking it a bit, that's absolutely fine. Go for it, especially if it's a good answer, because they won't know that you've used the same answer like twice in a row. All it'll look like is you've got a very, like, you're thinking on it quite quickly and you've got a very good answer. And it also, have your personal statement, you can just rip stuff straight out of that, and talk about it if you are particularly attached to something. So yeah, those are another good couple of things about MMI. And then for all the like pros and cons for MMIs tend to just be like inverted for panel, so it's really easy to build a good report. But if you don't, then that can make your interview quite tough. You can't just like keep repeating the same thing over again. So swings and roundabouts. Most of them tend to be MMI now. I don't think, off the top of my head, I can't remember any that are still panel interviews. But double check with like what they say, but I'd say far and beyond, you're probably going to have MMIs. And then after that, you just sort of a waiting game, and you have to sit around and wait to see what happens.
Do you find the environment of an MMI like a bit noisy or hard to concentrate?
You would think so. Yeah, I get what you mean. So you would think so, especially because a lot of the time it's just like these flimsy hospital curtains separating the station. But when you get in there, you're so, because it's silent while you're reading the scenario. When you get in there, you're so like focused on your own station, you tend not to listen to what other people say. So like there will be a bit of noise, there will be like some background noise, but you'll be so focused on what you're doing that you won't really worry about what they're doing until your station's finished. Oh, that's another point with MMIs. So once you finished with panel interviews, once you finished a question, they will then ask you more questions. With an MMI, they only have a certain list of questions they can ask you to make it more objective. So what that means is that once you get through that list of questions, they're out. Don't feel the silence. Like, as much as it will be super awkward and you'll really want to talk, do not feel that silence. Just sit there, be zen, listen to what's going on in the next station. But equally
with the clock.
Yeah, literally, they'll just stop. They'll be sitting there writing down their writing, and that's it. It is very awkward. So like, be prepared for it.
But they're not just staring at you. They're like kind of writing down.
It depends who you get. I did have one guy that just sort of stared me down. I was like, this is uncomfortable. But they tend not to. They tend to do that more in medical school when you're in your OSCEs and you're done and you've like just completely screwed up something in their specialty. and they'll just stare at you going, what kind of a dodo are you? So yeah, and that's always the time when people will try and like go back and add to things that they've said, or they'll try and go back and correct themselves because they'll be thinking about their answer. Don't do that, because they won't. 90% of the stuff that you try and correct, they probably won't have even realised happened and realised needs correcting. So all you'll be doing is flagging up all these areas in your answer where you've made a mistake to them, and they won't mark you up for correcting it because your answer will be finished. They'll just mark you down for going, oh yeah, actually that's not a great thing to say. So don't, like, when you're done with your answer, even if you could have expanded on it a bit, just try not to go back to it. Just try and leave it, and then forget about that station. Just move on to the next one. Okay. Any other questions? No. Awesome. Right. I think that's about it. I don't think I've missed out stuff.
All right. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah. So if you have any other questions or anything, feel free to let me, like, any questions later, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Okay, bye. Sorry, no, I'm back. I've just seen your question. How do you choose your uni again? So yeah, base it on those, not exclusively on those three things, but there are three key things to take into account in terms of like what's the course like, how much clinical experience do you get, and like, is it a campus uni, is it a city uni, do you actually like the place it's in? And then there are kind of clubs and societies do the university, and in fact that's something to take into account with it's quite, so when you, before you go to like every interview, you just look it up in terms of, so they'll say on their course website like how they structure their course. So they'll say whether it's problem-based learning, case-based learning, and or just from like the university website, you'll know whether it's a city or uni campus, depending on whether it's got a campus itself or whether it's just strewn around a city. That's okay. So case-based learning, which is like where they give you, it's like a mix between problem-based, where they give you a scenario and you just go research it yourself without much guidance. Case-based learning is like a mix between that and lectures, and then you've got lectures, which is you turn up to a lecture theatre and listen to what's going on. But yeah, there are other things as well, and it's probably a good idea to have gone on like the university's website and have a look at the clubs and societies they have on offer. Because if they say, why do you want to come to this uni over another one, you can talk about the course, you can talk about like the location, you can talk about clinical experience, but then you can also throw out like this really rogue society, like, I don't know, like kettle society or like bell ringing society or something so rogue that you could only have gotten it from actually looking at the website and like having a decent interest. And if you do something like that, then they'll be like, okay, this person's actually like done some research on the university, and that'll just be another box tick. And I'll also, so people always ask, like, if they say, do you have any questions at the end, should I ask a question, should I not? Because if you don't ask a question, it looks like you're not interested. If you do ask a question, it looks like you haven't done your research properly. So a nice like medium ground for that is just to say, after talking to like after talking to medical students and people at the university, I don't have any further questions. And what that'll say is that you did have questions, you took the initiative and asked others, and now you don't, rather than just saying no. It's just like a little tip. Yeah, well, they might not ask you like if you have any questions. Usually they ask you that in the last couple of stations. But yeah, if they do, that's a good way to do it. Yeah, and in general with the interview, just try and look at both sides of it. So again, like this is all on the other video, but try and, if they give you a question, try and look at it from different perspectives and like talk about it from different perspectives, and like do it in a nice logical way that shows that you can think of things from multiple points of view and like communicate an argument quite coherently. And a lot of the time they won't particularly care like what answer you come out with, as long as it isn't illegal. They will just want to see that you can sort of consider lots of evidence and come to a decision based off it. Yeah, you get 4 choices. So with Oxbridge, you can only choose one of them, so you can't apply to Oxford and Cambridge. And then the other 3 are just whatever you want to do. And then you get one extra choice, a 5th choice, but that can't be a medicine one. So most people do biomedical sciences just because your personal statement you don't need to then rewrite, because it's stressful enough having to do one. Like no one wants to write 2. Any other questions while we're waiting for them to finish typing? So yeah, Imperial would be in your remaining 3. It's only Oxbridge that you can choose one of. Right. So I don't go to either of them, so I can't say with a whole amount of like certainty. The best people to ask about like how they teach at Cambridge will be either like Fiona or Yoink. But in terms of Imperial, I'll have a quick look on Google, but I'm fairly certain it is a lecture-based university. Let me have a look. I don't think Imperial are huge on. Go with me. So generally, and again, this is just going off what I've heard, so it might not be fully true. But I think Cambridge is much more like they do essay-based exams and they have like essay-based subjects. They are much more like lecture-driven, and I don't think you get a whole load of clinical exposure. Again, I might be wrong, but from what I've heard, I don't think so. Imperial, I think you probably get a bit more clinical exposure, but they're also, by the looks of this, mostly lecture-based, with like a little bit of PBL thrown in here and there. Yeah. So the best again, like the best place to look will. So literally, what I've done is I've just typed in Imperial Medicine course structure into Google, and it takes you to like that page. So that is, and like each university will have one that you can go over and look at how their course is structured. So that's what I'd say to do. Any other questions? No? Cool. Okay. So in that case, I will leave it there. Cheers.